Well, good afternoon, Jenny Mitchell. It's great to have you on the Cause Leadership podcast today.
And it's kind of fun to be on the other side of the table, Dave. Normally I'm the host, so here I am being the guest, and all of my neurotices about control have gone out the window.
Oh, good. Okay, well, that's fun. As I said to you earlier, I'm going to give you the short intro and tell our guests who are joining us today that they can find the full, intro of Jenny Mitchell in our show notes. So we'll do that. But Jenny Mitchell is an artist. She's a fundraiser. She's an author and speaker. She's an executive coach, and she's the CEO of Chavender. And I am just excited to have her on the podcast today to talk about all things leadership. And for those who don't know Jenny, you're going to get to know her today a little bit. And she's just a great person and lots of fun to be with. So I've gotta ask you this. How does it feel to be you these days?
What a question to start. Okay. Pinch me, to be honest.
Yeah.
Pinch me. Where do I start? So I'm still here at 50 something. Let's start there.
Yeah.
I'm on this side of the grass. Apparently that's the way we describe it. I'm doing amazing work that I care deeply about. I am privileged to have a community of people around me, yourself included, Dave, who are very special, who share my values, who I can go to support and ask questions. And I get to support amazing leaders doing work in predominantly the not-for-profit world, although I am in both worlds these days. And it feels like a big arrival. It's taken me a long time to get here, and anybody who reads my bio will understand what that means to me.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Good. Well, we're going to dive into a bit of your story today, and really looking forward to that. But you're kind of unique. You have a Doctor of Musical Arts, and I thought, Jenny and I are peers. This is going to be a great conversation. But then she throws in, I'm a Doctor of Musical Arts. And it's like, I feel less than.
So, I know.
Tell me that story, because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a really cool story. And it's funny. I meet more and more musicians and theater buffs and artists in my world. And I want to say that I love that you started my bio by talking about me as an artist, because I used to sort of hide that. And what I've come to realize and integrate in my older years is that that's actually a very defining piece of who I am. I don't even know where the box is. So to try to put me in it is really hard. So the story on the music is, it was something that I was always drawn to. As a classical musician, I played piano for many years, Dave, and I excelled at it. I loved the specificity, the discipline. I was incredibly creative. I loved to live in my head. And I just kept jumping hurdles. So I did an undergrad at McGill University here outside of Montreal. And I was still good at it. So I jumped another hurdle, and it gave me an opportunity to get to New York City, where I did a master's. Wow. And that was an incredible experience for a girl from a small town from Ontario. And again, the gifts kept coming, and I enrolled and got accepted to, surprise, surprise, a doctorate degree in SUNY Stony Brook at one of the most prestigious graduate school only master's or doctorate programs. And I tell people that I had this epiphany while listening to the group of my peers in the program perform together. They had each picked one piece to play in this concert, and it was all of Gil Kalish was the teachers, students. And I had two thoughts at once, Dave. One was, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm here. And the second one was, oh my gosh, everybody wants this way more than I do.
Okay. Wow.
And I realized that I had other gifts. I always loved to bring people together. I was always the organizer. I was the rabble rouser. I liked to do the administrative stuff. I like to bring people along. And when my family came along, I realized that I could explore those gifts. But it's been a wonderful backdrop to an amazing career, and it's served me really well as far as curiosity, insatiable sort of obsession, I think is fair enough to say, about how things work and wanting to get to the bottom, and very self-motivated. I think that's probably what music gave me the most of.
That's interesting. So can we dive into that just for 1 second? Curious, what, after all of that work 3 degrees. What what was the trigger that sort of said, maybe this isn't what I want enough of, or want enough as
Yeah.
far as to pursue it?
Yeah. So when we go into a music degree, nobody thinks about what the lifestyle of a musician is like.
Sure.
Nobody thinks about that it's all teaching from 5 till 9 p.m.
Mm,
It's your weekends. I was teaching at a community college all day Saturday morning. I had one baby and I could kind of swing it. And then I had the second baby and I was like, okay, this isn't going to work because my
yeah.
husband works regular hours. Like, to be perfectly honest, that was a piece of it.
Yeah.
The second piece was that, I actively transitioned careers to find daytime hours.
Mm,
And I asked myself, okay, what skills do I have that I can transfer? And the writing, because I had written a PhD, I could write.
yeah.
So I actually started my life in grant writing, which I absolutely, no offense to all those grant writers, absolutely
Right.
hate.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very grateful for what it gave me. And I took a course at NYU in Fundraising 101. And that also was kind of like a light bulb moment that you
Okay.
could actually get paid to bring people together and get
Yeah.
excited. And
That's fun.
that was an amazing experience for me.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, well, hey, thank you. And for all those who are grant writers, we love you and thank you for what you do. We just can't sit still at a desk long enough to do it anymore. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
not that I ever did. Sorry, I shouldn't even express that. But hey,
Yeah.
so you got interested in fundraising, and
Mm-hmm.
I just learned that it was fundraising 101 at NYU. So that's cool. But what what was it about fundraising? Obviously, you're a people person, no question about that. You bring
Mm-hmm.
people together, but we all know that fundraising is more than that. So what caught your attention?
Yeah. And I I hesitate to use the word fell into fundraising because I've
Yeah,
now learned that we're not doing the profession we're doing the profession a disservice when we use that phrase.
yeah, sure.
So one thing I've been trying to say is I was drawn to fundraising, or I was
Yeah,
curious about it.
okay.
But honestly, I fell into it. And what happened was I went to the development office at the conservatory where I was working, and I said, guys, we got to do something about these pianos. Like, these
Okay.
pianos in the concert
Yeah.
hall are terrible. Like,
Hmm.
we can't have our students playing on these. And the words were, well, we'd have to fundraise. And I was like, okay, well, how do we do that? I don't know how to do that. Let's get a team together. The piece that I always was drawn to is a couple things. Okay, this is good. This is a great question. So, on the surface, fundraising looks very not easy, but straightforward.
Hmm.
And what I have come to realize every year in this business is there's so much more complexity to it than I ever thought possible.
Sure. Yeah.
So when I first started, I thought it was way more about mechanics and A to B and getting the pages right and getting the language right. And then as I got older, I realized, oh no, it really matters who's on the team and who's helping with this
Hmm.
stuff internally and staff. And then you mature and you realize, no, actually, the influencers, the people that are your champions, your volunteers, they're the most important part. And now in my later career, I am obsessed with strategy and communications and marketing, which I used to poo poo, to be honest, as a don't tell anybody, but I used to. And getting that strategy right now to me is so fundamental. It's that rather than jumping at something, really taking the time to figure out and analyze where you can make those shifts and controlling the narrative and the message probably ties back to my work as an executive coach, Dave, where
Hmm.
you believe the stories you tell yourself about yourself.
Hmm.
And so having a chance to control, and maybe control is the wrong word, massage that narrative. But I always found the goodness in people. And I'm not making this sound cheesy just because I'm on a podcast. Like,
Hmm.
the people that showed up to help were always awesome people.
Yeah.
And they were the people I wanted to be around. And I'm sure you feel that way too when you're doing recruitment and why you stay in this business, because the people are amazing and
Hmm.
they deeply care.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Well, okay. Thank you. We'll probably come back to the fundraising conversation in a little bit, but what I really want to jump into with you is Underdog Leadership. That's your podcast, but obviously Chavender, your company, and if I can show this properly, your book, Embracing Ambition. So we're going to be jumping into that as well, and we'll put some show notes as to where people can buy a copy of that as well. But I know your heart, along with the nonprofit space, obviously, and fundraising being kind of one of those areas that launched you into it. But obviously, leadership is important to you, and I know it resonates. And obviously, you've taken the time to commit a book to that, along with
Yeah.
some other amazing women. It sounds like that you guys got together and wrote a book over the weekend. Well, maybe not over the weekend, but you certainly put the frameworks together for it. So we'll talk about that as well. But let me just ask you, what's your thought on leadership today, just in the nonprofit space, the things that you're seeing, maybe some of the concerns that your clients are
Yeah.
bringing to you, your coaching clients or your other clients, both in Canada and the US? Just curious,
Yeah.
what are you hearing these days around leadership in our space?
I hear a lot of people being afraid to be bold.
Okay.
I hear whether it's the economy, whether it's uncertainty, any of that kind of element, that I hear a lot of scarcity.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of worry. I want to have compassion for all of those feelings, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I want to say nobody's going to buy into a vision that isn't inspiring and exciting and that we aren't fully committed to.
Yeah.
So as far as leadership goes, I learned a lot about leadership being a chair of a board. And in the book, I talk about being the chair of a board and all the angst that I had about being a chair of the board. Dave, we've had conversations, multiple, right, about being a chair of the board. And, I think leadership is a responsibility that requires thoughtfulness and action. So often I see leadership or people in leadership doing the thoughtful and the let's call it kicking the tires analogy, but not actually making the tough decisions, good or bad or otherwise, that move things forward, even if it means we screw up, right? Even if it means we make the wrong choice. I work so hard with clients, helping them frame ways to ask good questions with good guardrails so that good decisions, ... for now, can be made.
Yeah.
Because I am too old and too long in the tooth to sit around and ruminate on things and not get stuff done. So to answer your question, we have to be bolder. We have to be braver. We have to be courageous, and we have to be okay with making the wrong choices and being able to pivot. That's my wish for the next, because we don't know what's coming down the pipes the next 5 years.
Yeah. No, it's going to be a challenging 5 years, frankly, is my perspective on that. What's underdog leadership? How do you define that?
So I want to tell a story. I've never told this story before, but I think this approach. So A, I love dogs. B, who doesn't love a good underdog?
Right.
But let me explain what it means to me. It starts with a story on a beach in Thailand, actually. The dogs run wild. And there was this cute little puppy with this huge gash, Dave, on his head from front to back, just glaringly awful, in the ocean. So I was like, okay, the salt water's clearing it out. And then I proceeded to watch all these other dogs on the beach go after him, poke at this hole, almost attempt to drown him, this poor little guy, right? And I felt helpless because I couldn't help him. And that image has stayed so deeply with me over many, many years. This was when I was in my 20s, when I was with my sister. Now, he's a good example of an underdog. He survived that experience. And what I find so fascinating about it is, how does he adjust his behavior going forward so he's not there again? So people say to me, oh, I don't like the idea underdog because I've never been an underdog. I'm like, that's not what it's about. What I'm trying to explain to people is, when you have been in a challenging situation, when you have gone through something, when you have experienced, been ignored, been invisible, been dismissed, all of those things, they actually make you the perfect candidate for leadership. And it behooves you, there's a responsibility here, that it behooves you to get off your duff, learn from what happened, and get there so you can be the board chair that does the inclusive conversations, that makes sure everyone is heard, that creates that space. And that's why you are perfectly positioned, because we need that empathetic underdog to be in charge. And I think that absolutely is the leadership of the future. We don't need more top down. Thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, exactly. You brought up the example of the when you were board chair, and I know there's lessons that we all learn.
Ooh.
What are one or two key lessons in leadership that you learned when you were chairing a board?
Yeah. So to set the stage for your listeners, because I'm a consultant, it's a bit different, right? Because I didn't have those seminal, we call them heat experiences inside an organization. And that's the term that the research calls them, heat experience. Oh my God, we can't make payroll on Friday, or oh my gosh, half the team just quit, or those kinds of or we're on the front page of the Global Mail kind of heat experiences.
Right. Okay.
So I had sort of symbolized in my head, rightly or wrongly, that this leadership thing at the board was kind of my petri dish.
Okay.
And so I took it on very seriously. And I had an amazing number one, and I worked with him for years. I mean, I was there like 8 years on the board and 4 years as chair, 4.5. And during that time, just for context, we ran a fundraising campaign we raised about $1.667 million from an organization that had never raised a dollar in their lives, never asked their membership for money. And everybody told me it couldn't be done. Everybody was so worried. And very, very interestingly, rarely were they worried about their own capacity. So they often always had capacity themselves. They were worried about imposing that on others. So I just note that for those of you listening who are frustrated that your board members don't want to put on limits or expectations, sometimes it's not about them not wanting to give, it's their worry of imposing that on others. So back to the learnings. Number one, you got to be who you are, and you can't try and be someone else, because I definitely felt that I had to show up a certain way, and it gave me heebie-jeebies and actually panic attacks. So that's number one. Your style matters. I'm a very collaborative person. I felt that wasn't enough, to be honest, to lead with. And that really wore me down. Number two, you're not going to please all the people all the time. I distinctly remember the time when I called a vote, and I didn't think I would ever be a president that called a vote. But back to that point we just talked about, we are not here to just shoot the breeze, sing kumbaya, and then defer the decision to next meeting. So I called a vote, and that's a seminal meeting. And the third thing I would say, people still matter. I wanted to lead through knowing and seeing those 9 board members. In my experience, people do not spend enough time thinking about those folks as a team. They just think of them as people on a board. And so we throw them into these situations and expect them to know how to behave and how to act and what roles they have. And yet we haven't defined the playboard, what game we're playing, what the rules are. And we tend to know the ones that we work more often with, like the treasurer or, however that works. But so we're surprised when people give us strange opinions at board meetings. And my response is always, well, have you talked to them about it outside the board meeting? Like, isn't that is the job. I call it spidering. So the spidering piece and how much heavy lifting that was also a real learning for me about how much work behind the scenes as a chair you are doing to keep consensus, to understand objections, to be able to address them, to help people see. Because if you're going to bring them along into something that's bold, as I mentioned earlier, they've got to feel that somebody has heard their objections. So those are just some. I mean, I could go on. It was very, very seminal to me, and I would encourage any of your listeners, if you have the opportunity and you really want to make a difference, there's I chose to have a ton of personal growth and professional growth through that role.
Yeah, no, that's great. And if anyone's interested, that story is also in your book, which we're going to move on to here. And so I'll hold it up again, Embracing Ambition. For those who see this on YouTube, for those who are listening, it's a great cover.
It is.
And the title is Embracing Ambition, Empowering Women to Step Out, Be Seen, and Lead. And this is Voices of Bold Leaders. So Jenny, you were obviously you contributed as an author. You were also the editor of this, but you brought a collective of women together for a weekend back in, was it 2022? I think. when you
So
did
where are
that.
we? Actually, it's 2023. It was
Okay.
only a year ago,
Oh,
April,
okay.
if you
All
can
right.
believe it.
But you guys spent the weekend together, sharing and really as a collective, kind of developing the framework for what became the book, and everyone's individual chapters that were part of that. So, would love for you just to talk about how that all came together,
Yeah.
and then we'll obviously jump into a bit more conversation around leadership.
Yeah. So I'm an academic.
Hmm.
I mentioned that I had degrees. So as an academic, the pinnacle of your career is writing a book.
Okay.
And as I thought about writing a book, I thought, oh my gosh, that's so boring. Me by myself in a room, ruminating on my life experiences.
Okay.
And then I was like, would I read that? I'm like, nah, I wouldn't read that. So I said, well, what would make it fun? Because I am a 7 on the Enneagram. So I like in new ideas. I'm definitely visionary, forward thinking. What would make it fun?
Hmm.
And I said, well, I would do it alongside people and we would do it in partnership and we could learn from each other and maybe we could kind of co-create this thing. And then I went to look for models,
Hmm.
and there are very few models of that. Very few. The only book I could find that was similar was Our Bodies, Our Minds, which was written by the Boston Women's Health Collective way back when, sort of a
Okay.
seminal book. And because very rarely do the authors write together, most often they just write a chapter and it gets contributed.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't want that. I wanted that connection. And so one of the things we did on the Saturday morning was, oh, and by the way, we picked a really nice hotel because
Okay.
in not for profit, we never get the nice
That's right.
hotels, right?
Exactly. That's right.
So we're going to be pampered. We're in a room and we worked in groups of 3. And I will share this on the podcast because I think this could be a game changer for many of the ways we do a lot of things in our sector.
Yeah.
One person told their story, one person asked questions, and one person listened. Just listened.
Wow. That's great.
And at the end of the storytelling, because people were testing out which story they wanted to tell, I wanted a moment in time. I didn't
Hmm.
want, I was born in 1968, 2
Right.
parents that were,
Yeah. Sure.
so that moment in time, I wanted to drop people into that moment. And the experience of having their stories reflected back to these women,
Mm-hmm.
the experience of hearing their leadership moments explained, translated, was way more meaningful and cathartic and I'd say milestoney than I had expected. And it left these women who are very smart women, by the way, with this sort of new understanding of who they were based on this discussion. And we've called it since the ability to catalog your leadership journey in situ, in
Yeah.
the moment,
Right.
rather than doing it at the end of our careers, which many of us do when we write memoirs. So that answers the mechanics and the fact that on Sunday, by the time we left, we were we at least had a framework, or at least we picked a story,
Yeah.
Dave.
Before you move
But
on, because
yeah,
you
please.
bring up a great point there. You refer to it as a gift of reflection, and not at the end of your career, but as you say, kind of in the moment or in the situation. What was the gift? What was the gift that
Mm,
the women that were writing felt that they
yeah.
were getting?
There was still, even in a room of high powered type A women, a sense of, am I doing this the right way?
Hmm. Okay.
And to have it reflected back by peers who were in a parallel role or position, and the respect that was created in that space was intangible but invaluable
Hmm.
at the same time.
Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were about to
No,
move on from there, but
no, but thank you for letting me kind of articulate it because I didn't expect that, Dave, to be
hmm.
honest.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, in major gifts when you're talking subjects or projects and then suddenly it clicks with the donor. That moment where you're like, "Oh, this is the project." And almost like the words fail you because you just know. That's what it felt like.
Hmm.
It was so, and we've kept in touch and they have kept in touch and we have a channel where we talk, and
Okay.
that sense of knowing people know you that deeply
Mm-hmm.
um, has never left that group. It's a very special thing that I'm very grateful to have curated but also been a part of.
Yeah, something that leaders need to do more often. Okay, so it's an awesome experience, and out of that comes a book, and now on a regular basis, you're dealing with folks that are coming to you for coaching. Um,
Yeah.
they're dealing with challenges. They're dealing with uh, where do I go from here? How do I grow? How do I lead my teams? Any number of
Yeah.
questions that are coming at you when you're coaching.
Yeah.
So when you consider um, the questions that people are bringing to you, and maybe many of them haven't had a chance to reflect on what those actually mean to them. How do you take somebody through a process of um, coming to understand who they are as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
coming to
Mm-hmm.
embrace it, and to be able to authentically express it? I know
Yeah.
that's a lot in one question,
No.
but maybe if you can distill that for us a little bit.
What I thought the business was 5 years ago, what
Mm,
the business is now is different. We had our first conversation for your listeners, and I asked Dave how do you do recruiting, and I know that's not the word we use, whatever.
yeah.
And he starts by saying, well, it's based on values, and I was
Mm,
like, oh, tell me more,
mm-hmm.
right? So I would answer you the same way. The pain point starts with I want to move up. The pain point starts with I'm not understood at work. The pain point starts with I don't understand why just because I'm young nobody thinks I know anything.
Right. Yeah.
Those are the pain points. So that's what it looks like on the surface, Dave. But if you get underneath it and you start to ask those open-ended questions that a good coach hopefully kind of gets curious, or even
Yeah.
language, what you find is there's not a lot of buckets that are they're all kind of related to the same three buckets. It's sort of like, am I good enough?
Mm,
um do I like myself?
mm.
And you know can I exist outside my accolades and my external validation?
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
That am I good enough one robs so many of us of our potential and our power.
Yeah.
And it's especially in the scarcity mindset of not for profit, especially when you haven't done something before. Like, these people come and think they know how to run a multi-million dollar business when they've never run a multi-million, and
Yeah.
then they beat themselves up because they don't know how to do it. I'm like, but how are you supposed to know how to do this if you've never done it,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. That's right.
And those elements of perfectionism and those elements of getting it right and not being exposed, that's that brittle leadership. I like to use that term,
Yeah.
the sort of tight, brittle, and that's, I think, maybe the antithesis of authentic. Those are patterns because of, and I'm going to go into my female speak, where societally women are not allowed to be real and authentic in the same way that men are. Let me
Yeah.
explain it
Mm-hmm.
before. There are so many more expectations and parameters put around women's behaviors, women's language,
Yeah.
women's voices, and not to mention if you're not a white woman. Let's just
Mm,
say that one out loud,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
So you're fighting against these currents, which means that it's really hard to reconnect with your gut and who you are. So the old days, I would say to you, I do help people move from number 2 to number 1. And I love that work. And
Sure.
it can be very tactical, right? Strategic and tactical. But I still believe that at the core, to make it sustainable, you have to think you are enough
Mm,
and believe that you like the way you do things.
mm,
And that takes, wait for it, reflection
mm.
and conversation and acceptance.
Yeah. 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 For sure.
Does
Uh,
that resonate with your experiences of coming through the ranks and just age? I was just curious whether that resonates with you, Dave.
it's funny because the older I get, the more I think I was more mature when I was 18. But when you sort of reflect on life circumstances and what you've achieved, where you've gotten to, but that's on the career side, but also on the personal side, right?
Yeah.
You go through life changes, families,
Yeah.
you lose loved ones, you raise children, there's a combination of things that all happen. And for me, I mean, I'm 57, so at this stage,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, there's less in front than there is behind, and uh, and yet I'm still feeling like I've got lots to learn,
I know.
and and yet and opportunities to take advantage of as well. Because
Yeah. It's like the motivation goes from external to internal,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So initially, the motivation is hurdle jumping. I call myself a hurdle jumper. Anybody who has teenagers knows that you don't. It doesn't matter how much you cheerlead beside the child's bed or the teenager's bed.
yeah,
If they're not motivated to get up, they're not getting up.
that's right.
So that external motivation, and then as we grow in age, and this is where I think music really came in for me, Dave,
Yeah,
is that internal motivation, that curiosity, that passion for understanding. That's what true talent development is figuring out of your staff what they're really really jazzed about from a
yeah,
motivational perspective and putting more of that in front of them.
yeah,
It could be as simple as that, and as I get older I'm drawn to things and I allow myself to be drawn to them in a way that I have the privilege of doing that. I can
yeah,
pick and choose more now. But yeah, I when I get curious I allow myself to intrinsically get curious and motivated to know more, and that just totally lights me up,
yeah.
100%.
Let's talk about Chavender as a company. I want you to define it. It's another animal story, right? the, the fish in Nova Scotia. So uh, you love music, and apparently you love animals too. So this is
I do.
good. But maybe tell us that story, like
Yeah.
how you named it in the first place, but also what you do through Chavender and how people can reach you and how you can help them.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, delighted to. So the Chavender is a kind of fish that lives on the east coast of Canada. So, if for our American friends, sort of outside of Boston and up,
Yeah.
and for our Canadian friends, think Lunenburg. And in that space, this fish can adapt very well. So it can have briny water where it mixes with the rivers
Yeah.
mix with the salt water. It's where there was tons and tons of boats going through, and so the water would get all churned up and it would be kind of murky, and the temperatures would fluctuate a lot in that part of the world, and this fish would survive
Mm,
and adapt.
okay.
And I thought, what a fantastic analogy for leadership. It's never static. It's
Yeah.
always moving and changing. As you move and change, people around you move and change. And I just love that analogy. I will also say for funsies, I'm also a Pisces.
Okay. Yeah.
So our gift is to be able to see things from many different perspectives,
Mm,
which can be exhausting and enlightening.
yeah.
And so I really liked that analogy, and my logo has a fish in it, and so that's the story on the fish.
Oh, that's cool. So adaptability obviously is a huge element of leadership, uh, and I think you're helping a lot of people from that perspective. Uh, you're also working with Sherry, who
Yeah.
is also mentoring some folks as well. So yeah, just give us the lowdown on Chavender as a business and how people can reach you and how
Yes.
you can help them.
Yeah, I got excited about the fish
Yeah,
story.
no,
This
that's good.
happens a lot. Sorry.
That's good.
And it's such a great story. So the business has changed a lot. Some of you that knew me from way back when would know me as a fundraising consultant,
Yeah,
and I loved that work. I cut my teeth as that work. I worked with many different organizations, different sizes, different sectors, but the common theme was always the staff. So when I sort of started streamlining and getting clearer on how Chavender could make a difference more in the most impactful way, it was around coaching. I realized that the coaching of the people so they could make the change was a much better use of my time than their time,
right. Yeah,
and they could implement. And so what's changed lately is that Sherry has joined the business. Sherry Schaefer, she does the West Coast, so she's in Alberta.
yeah,
And so together we are now describing this. Let me test this out, my elevator pitch, that we share and support the continuum of leadership from the
okay.
emerging leader to the executive suite.
Yeah,
Sherry runs programs for, believe it or not, 0 to 5 is a really under-supported area in fund development. And so we have programs where they can build networks. Yes, there's fundraising, but it's also a lot of other skills, soft skills around it. And then I support the senior leadership through one-on-one coaching for
hmm,
executives and group programs where there's so much value. Some people call them masterminds,
yeah,
and so that's kind of how we support. And basically, all of our programs are one-on-one or group, and the goal is to share knowledge, build community, build connection,
yeah,
and amplify our strengths. Because every time I got into a situation, I was like, I guess I have to write a volunteer manual, handbook, blah, blah, blah. It was so much faster to call somebody and said, hey, do you have a volunteer handbook, manual,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Because we were so strapped for time.
Sure.
And so the vision going forward for Chavender and how you can reach me, I guess, is the podcast is sort of our freebie. It's the place people can find out about me. There's amazing conversations in there. So many things I'm very proud of, including you, Dave. You're on there for this season.
Thank you.
And then, the website is chavender.com. I say it's Chavender like lavender, but with a CH at the beginning, because the only thing I would do different is I would change that. It's such a hard name to spell, but then again, I'm Jenny Mitchell. So, it's the most, vanilla B flat you could ever have. And I'm also on LinkedIn, but again, you'll probably finding Chavender like lavender is easier than finding Jenny Mitchell. And I'd be delighted. We do these podcasts, Dave, and don't you ever wonder, like, what are people's thoughts? Or I always invite people to comment because I want to hear what resonates with others. I'm always curious about that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't want to let you go yet, though. So thank you for talking about that. But I did just want to revisit. We talked about fundraising earlier. Obviously, you have experience as a fundraiser, but we have lots of charities that are in need of fundraisers. We have a generation that's coming up. It's probably millennial and Gen Z in many respects, at least right now. But we're, as you and I have talked about, this is a talent, an area of talent that we have a shortage in, and yet we need to be bringing up new and younger and emerging leaders in the fundraising space for the continued existence of a healthy charitable sector in Canada today. Yeah. Many of these folks will rise to leadership, and probably many are kind of on the cusp of leadership, depending on where they're at in their career as well. But what advice would you have for a 30-something emerging leader in fundraising and looking to kind of, their moonshot is perhaps a CEO down the road, a CEO role down the road someday. What would be your sort of parting advice for somebody like that?
It's such an important question. And we need those next generation folks. And please know, as no longer a next generation folk, I so value the contributions they bring, the ability to help use technology to cut to the chase. I find they're much better at that than us. And, it's one of the things that the gifts that they have. Advice. Two things come to mind. One is never put your career in the hands of one person and never expect that somebody will treat or take care of you in a career way without you tending and caring for your own career first.
Yeah.
So the old days was you kind of hooked onto a manager and you followed that manager around.
Sure. Yeah.
That is not the case anymore. And there's nothing wrong with loving your manager, and even the term hooking on to your manager, that sounds, making sure you're overt and clear with your manager what you're looking for, but that is no longer where it has to stop. I believe that you need to have visibility in other places if you're in a big shop, into other departments and other orgs, so that you can be supported in that play to move up in that bigger organization. And similarly, so visibility as a 30-year-old is incredibly important to me. And I want to acknowledge the challenge there is that many of us are having babies in their 30s. And so the hardest part is the networking, because it's all during bath time.
Sure.
Right?
Right. Yep. Okay.
And this is where I'll always laugh, because, the people say that women aren't ambitious. We didn't talk about that word, but, the people say, well, they didn't come to the golf tournament or they didn't come to the networking. I'm like, yeah, because they've got responsibilities that are different than yours. Yeah. So just be mindful of that. The second thing I wanted to say was, seeking, I don't like the term, we talk a lot at Chavender about mentorship, about succession planning. I find when I say mentor, it's the old version of mentorship, which is really stale, really like, this is how I did it and you're going to learn from me. I would maybe substitute the modern mentorship, which is a two-way mentorship, where you become allies with someone in your career, and there's a personal and a joyful part of it, and then there's a professional and a practical part of it. So the alliance although that sounds like war, so maybe that's the wrong word, but like the partnership
Yeah.
is mutually beneficial and is in the joy bucket
Yeah.
as part of your monthly accountability, not in like the, oh, I have to meet up with so-and-so and they're going to impart their knowledge to me. And if you can find a couple people like that, and they're very organic, I know there's some major gifts ones out there. I just mentioned that because how are you doing gift acceptance agreements? But those one-on-one ones to me are very special, and you can talk about things and strategize, because I think we get blind to the things that we know and we can't see the things we don't know.
Yeah.
So those are my two, Dave.
Yeah, good. Thank you. And you're 100% right. We were going to talk about the word ambition, and particularly as it related to embracing ambition. I mean, okay, my apologies for that. I skipped right over that question somehow.
Not at all. I love talking about this word, though. That's why it's such a what's the word? Lightning rod, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ambition.
But okay, so I don't want to end without having talked about that. So
okay, let's do it.
Let's do that. So
yeah.
Define it as. I mean, obviously, it's part of the title of your book. So what is it for you, and what are the things around it that make it a challenging word?
Ambition is the ability to show up as who you are, values aligned, go for the things that you feel are important to you, and not have to apologize for how you do it or who you are.
Yeah. And as you identify, that's been particularly challenging for women in leadership, right?
It has, because there have been such strong profiles / stereotypes of what a leader looks like. We fight against that. The funny part about the title is I market researched it. Okay. I sent it out to the women and to some of my colleagues and people I respected and asked some ideas. And what was interesting about adding embracing ambition, people asked me, oh, that's such a great idea. It warms it up. It makes it more feminine. Never even crossed my mind, Dave, that was what I was doing.
Okay.
And then once they said it, I can't unsee it. So in general, my younger generation women were like, no, we just want to call it ambition. Let's just call the book Ambition. And my older folks were like, no, I really like embracing. It warms it up a bit. It leaves more space for discussion. And it kind of epitomized to me my generation of women and the next generation up. Okay. The directness that they want to have, the way they want to be perceived and accepted. Yeah. And I applaud them. Yeah. We know from the research that women have they call it a double deficit bias or something. You can't be smart and nice, or you can't be pretty and smart. Like this, that just it doesn't compute in brains. And so I think at every point when you can proclaim to the world that you want to be ambitious, and for me, ambitious might be that I get to finish at 5 o'clock every day. Sure. I mean, that's a real great ambition, right. Which I mostly hold to, by the way, mostly. Good. I may work on the weekends when there's things that I'm excited about, because we talked about that intrinsic motivation. Yeah, sure. But defining ambition for yourself, holding yourself to it, and not being afraid to say it out loud. So many of us have been cautious about what we say, what we don't say. And then we end up with these weird rooms where people are not so much insincere. There's big gaps in how you know them. And I'm not interested in being in those rooms. So if you're ambitious, I say go for it. Say it out loud and describe it. And so I'm really grateful for the chance to answer that question, because I'd love to own that puppy for everybody. So, okay. So before we close, then just redefine it for us. You did it so nicely at the front end. Let's hear it again before we. Let's do it again. Yeah. Ambition is the ability to show up as yourself in alignment with your values, to go for what you want and what you desire in the world, and not have to apologize or justify it to anyone. Yeah. Love it. Jenny, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. Always great to connect with you, and great to hear some of your experience and of course the wisdom that you've been able to share with us as well. So great to have you as a guest, and this won't be the last time by any means, but looking forward to we'll get this out into the world and let people hear it and see it. So thank you. Good to have you here today. My absolute pleasure, and thanks for the platform.